Have you ever asked yourself what is truly keeping you small? What invisible wall exists between the life you are living right now and the life you know, deep in your heart, that you were meant to live? Because most people never stop long enough to ask that question. And that silence, that avoidance, is exactly where dreams go to die. Think about that for a moment, because it is not a small question. It is the most important question you will ever face. And the answer is living somewhere inside you right now, waiting for you to be brave enough to look at it. Welcome to English to Inspire, the channel where we use the power of real stories, true stories, human stories, to help you grow your English and at the same time grow yourself. Because language is not just grammar and vocabulary, it is a door. And today, we are going to open a very big door together. If this kind of content speaks to your soul, if you feel that learning English should do more than teach you words, that it should move you, challenge you, and change you, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because every single week we bring you a new story that can shift the way you see your world. Today, the story we are telling is one of the greatest stories ever lived on this planet. The story of a man who had every reason to give up, every reason to break, every reason to hate, and yet he chose something different, something almost impossible to understand, something that made him not just a leader of a country but a symbol of what a human being can truly become when they refuse to let the world define them. His name is Nelson Mandela. And before you say that, you already know who he is. Before you think this is just another history lesson, I want you to stop and really listen, because this story is not just about him. It is about you. It is about the prison you are living in right now. The one you built yourself, with your fears, your doubts, your excuses, and your silence. Mandela spent 27 years locked inside a physical cell on an island, and he came out more free than any of his captors. And that should make you think. That should shake something inside you, because you are not in a physical prison. You have no bars on your windows, no guards at your door, and yet something is holding you back. Something is keeping you in the same place, the same habits, the same small version of yourself, year after year. And today, we are going to find out what that something is. This is not just English practice. This is a conversation about your life. So stay with me, because the next 40 minutes might be the most important 40 minutes you spend this year. And the story is just beginning. To understand Nelson Mandela, you cannot start with the prison. You cannot start with the presidency. And you cannot start with the applause of millions of people around the world. Because none of that makes sense unless you first go back to the beginning, back to a tiny village called Mvizo, on the banks of a Mabash River in the eastern Cape of South Africa, where on the 18th of July, 1918, a boy was born into a world that had already decided what his life was going to look like before he even took his first breath. His father was a chief of the Thembu people, a man of authority and tradition, and from the very beginning, young Nelson, whose birth name was Roli Hala, a name that literally means pulling the branch of a tree, or, more simply, troublemaker, was surrounded by the weight of responsibility, the stories of his ancestors, and the deep sense that life was something serious, something that carried meaning far beyond just waking up every morning and getting through the day. Think about your own beginning for a moment. Think about where you come from, because so many people use their origin as an excuse. They say, I was born poor. I was born in the wrong city. I was born into the wrong family. And they use that story to explain why they have not moved, why they have not grown, why they are still standing in the same place they were 5 years ago. But Mandela's story teaches us something completely different, because he was born in a place with no electricity, no running water, no global internet connection, no English classes on YouTube, and yet something inside him burned. Something inside him refused to accept that the coordinates of his birth would be the coordinates of his destiny. When his father died, young Nelson was taken under the guardianship of a regent named Jangantabadi. And this man, this guardian, changed everything, because he gave Nelson access to education. He gave him a seat at the table where elders spoke, where decisions were made, where the problems of the community were discussed openly. And the young boy sat there and he listened, not just with his ears, but with his whole soul. And he began to understand that leadership is not about speaking the loudest. It is about listening the deepest. It is about understanding that your life is connected to the lives of everyone around you. And that is a lesson that most people in the modern world have completely forgotten. Real talk. And listen carefully here. Your environment shaped you. Yes, that is true. Your childhood marked you. Your struggles left scars. That is real. Nobody is denying that. But Mandela grew up herding cattle in the hills of the Eastern Cape and ended up leading an entire nation out of darkness. So the question is not where you started. The question is what you are doing with the fire that is still burning inside you right now. Because that fire did not go out. It is still there. It has always been there. And this story is going to remind you of that. One chapter at a time. One word at a time. One brave decision at a time. There is a word that Nelson Mandela used more than almost any other word in his entire life. And that word is education. And he did not use it the way people use it today. Casually. As if it were just a certificate you hang on a wall or a box you check before you go get a job. He used it the way a man in the desert uses the word water. With urgency. With desperation. With the full understanding that without it you will not survive. And that understanding, that fire for learning, was not something that came easily or comfortably to him. It was something he had to fight for, sacrifice for, and believe in, even when the world around him was doing everything it could to convince him that knowledge was not meant for someone like him. When Mandela first arrived at school, his teacher gave him an English name, Nelson, because that was the colonial custom of the time. African children were given European names, as if their own names were not good enough, as if their identity needed to be replaced before their education could begin. And even this small humiliation at the very door of learning was something Mandela absorbed without letting it break him, because he understood, even as a young boy, that what he was going to find inside that classroom was more powerful than any insult waiting for him outside it. He went on to study at some of the most respected institutions in South Africa, including the University of Fort Hare, which was at that time one of the very few places where black Africans could receive a higher education. And it was there that his mind truly opened. It was there that he began to read voraciously, to debate fiercely, to question everything, to understand that the system he was living under was not natural, was not inevitable, was not the way things had to be. And that awareness, that dangerous, beautiful awareness, is what happens when you give a hungry mind access to real knowledge. Now here is where I need to stop and speak directly to you, because you are here right now, watching this video, which means you have access to something Mandela had to struggle and sacrifice just to get close to. You have access to education. You have access to information. You have access to language. And the question I need to ask you is this: what are you doing with it? Because access without action is just noise. Opportunity without effort is just a dream that never wakes up. And every single day that you have the ability to learn and you choose comfort instead, you are making a decision. Maybe not consciously, but you are making it. And that decision has a cost that you will feel later, even if you cannot feel it right now. Mandela later studied law, teaching himself, reading by the weak light available to him, pushing forward even when the system threw obstacle after obstacle in his path. And he did it not because it was easy, not because someone was cheering him on every step of the way, but because he understood that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from him. That education was freedom in its purest and most portable form. And if you are learning English right now, if you are here building something new inside yourself, then you already understand that truth in your own way. And that means the fire is still alive. And that means there is still time. To truly understand what Nelson Mandela fought against, you need to understand the world he woke up into every single morning. A world that was not just unfair in the small, everyday ways that life can be unfair for all of us, but a world that was systematically, legally, and brutally designed to tell certain human beings that they were worth less than others, that their dreams were illegal, that their dignity was a threat, and that their very existence needed to be controlled, separated, and suppressed by the full force of a government that had decided, in cold and calculated terms, that the color of your skin determined the value of your life. This system had a name, and that name was apartheid, an Afrikaans word that means separateness. And although the word sounds almost clean, almost academic when you say it out loud, the reality it described was anything but clean, because apartheid was not just a political policy. It was a complete architecture of oppression, a carefully constructed cage built around millions of human beings who had done nothing wrong, except being born with the wrong skin color in the wrong country, at the wrong moment in history. And Mandela grew up inside that cage, breathed its air every day, felt its walls every time he tried to move forward, every time he tried to simply live as a full human being. Under apartheid, black South Africans could not vote, could not own land in most areas, could not walk freely in certain neighborhoods, could not use the same beaches, the same hospitals, the same schools, the same park benches as white South Africans. And if any of this sounds almost unbelievable to you, if part of you wants to say that cannot be real, that is exactly the point, because oppression always sounds unbelievable to people who have never had to live inside it. And that is why stories like Mandela's matter so deeply, because they force us to look at what human beings are capable of doing to each other when fear and power combine into something truly dangerous. Now I want you to think about something, and I want you to think about it honestly, because real growth requires honesty. And the question is this: have you ever used the difficulty of your circumstances as a reason to stop moving? Have you ever looked at the obstacles in front of you and decided that they were simply too big, too heavy, too permanent to overcome? Because if you have, and most of us have, at some point, then Mandela's response to apartheid is going to challenge you in a way that is uncomfortable and necessary at the same time. Because he did not look at that system and collapse. He did not look at those walls and accept them as permanent. He looked at them and started planning, started organizing, started believing with every cell in his body that a system built by human hands could be dismantled by human hands. And that belief, that stubborn, unshakable, almost unreasonable belief, is the thing that separates people who change history from people who simply watch history happen to them. And the clock is ticking for you right now. The world is moving, and the only question that matters is which one of those people you are going to choose to be. There comes a moment in every person's life, a specific, defining, unmistakable moment, when you are standing at a crossroads and you feel it in your chest, you feel it in your gut, that the decision you make in that moment is going to determine not just what happens next week or next year, but who you fundamentally are as a human being. And for Nelson Mandela, that moment came in the early 1940s, when he arrived in Johannesburg, the great city of gold, and saw with his own eyes the full, unfiltered, devastating reality of what apartheid was doing to his people. Not as an abstract political concept, but as a living, breathing, daily humiliation that was crushing the dignity of millions of human beings who deserved so much better than what they were receiving. And something inside him shifted. Something cracked open. And the man who walked into that city was not quite the same man who would walk out of it, because he had seen too much, felt too much, and understood too much to ever go back to silence. In Johannesburg, Mandela connected with the African National Congress, the ANC, an organization that had been fighting for the rights of black South Africans since 1912. And it was here that he found his tribe, his people, the community of minds and hearts that shared his anger and his vision. And together with his close friend Oliver Tambo and other brilliant, passionate young leaders, he co-founded the ANC Youth League in 1944 because he felt that the existing movement needed more energy, more urgency, more fire. And he was right, because hunger without direction is just pain. But hunger with organization becomes a revolution. Now let me speak to you directly here. Because this part of Mandela's story is not just history, it is a mirror. And what it is reflecting back at you is the question of whether you have found your direction yet, whether you have taken the anger, the frustration, the hunger that lives inside you and given it a shape, a purpose, a plan. Because so many people are full of fire, but they burn themselves. Instead of using that fire to build something, they complain without creating. They dream without deciding. They wait for the perfect moment, as if the perfect moment is something that arrives on its own, instead of something you build with your own hands every single day. Mandela made a decision, and that decision cost him everything. His comfort, his freedom, eventually 27 years of his life. But he made it with open eyes. He made it knowing the price. And he made it because he understood that a life lived in safe silence, while injustice walks freely, is not really a life at all. It is just a very comfortable form of dying. And that idea should land somewhere deep inside you. Because the excuses you are making right now, the reasons you are telling yourself why today is not the right day to start, why next month will be better, why you will begin when things calm down, those excuses are the bars of your own prison. And unlike Mandela, nobody put you there, which means the key has always been in your hand, and the door has always been open, and the only thing missing has been the decision to walk through it. On the 5th of August, 1962, Nelson Mandela was arrested by the South African police, and 2 years later, in 1964, he stood in a courtroom and listened as a judge sentenced him to life imprisonment. And as he heard those words, life imprisonment, he looked at the people who loved him. He looked at his comrades, and he did not break. He did not collapse. He did not beg. Instead, he held his head up and he said something that echoed around the world. He said that he had fought against white domination, and he had fought against black domination, and that he cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, and that it was an ideal for which he was prepared to die. And those words, spoken calmly and clearly, in the face of a life sentence, tell you everything you need to know about the quality of the man who spoke them. Because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision that something else matters more than your fear. And in that courtroom, on that day, Mandela showed the world what courage actually looks like when it is real. He was taken to Robben Island, a cold and isolated prison off the coast of Cape Town, and there he was, placed in a cell that measured 8 feet by 7 feet, a space so small that he could touch both walls if he stretched out his arms. And in that cell, in that suffocating, humiliating, deliberately dehumanizing space, Nelson Mandela lived for 18 of his 27 years in prison, breaking rocks in a lime quarry under the burning South African sun, eating poor food, sleeping on a thin mat on a cold floor, denied access to his family, denied the basic dignities that most of us take completely for granted every single day without even noticing that we have them. And here is what I need you to understand. Here is the part that should shake you, because it is so easy to read those words and feel sad for Mandela. It is so easy to feel sympathy and then go back to your comfortable life and forget. But the real lesson is not about feeling sad. The real lesson is about what he did inside that cell. Because he did not waste those years. He did not spend 27 years feeling sorry for himself. He did not surrender his mind just because they had taken his body. Instead, he studied. He read. He taught other prisoners. He thought deeply. He planned carefully. He grew quietly. And he became, in that tiny cell, a larger human being than most people become in a lifetime of total freedom. And that fact should hit you like a wave. Because you have freedom right now. You have time, you have access, you have opportunity. And the question burning in the air between us right now is, what exactly are you doing with all of it? Real talk. The prison you are living in has no walls, no guards, no iron bars. Your prison is made of procrastination and comfort, and the soft, seductive lie that tomorrow will be a better day to start. And Mandela, a man who had every legitimate reason to give up, every real and physical reason to break, chose to use his darkest years as his greatest classroom. And if he could build a future from inside a cell on a cold island, then you can build yours from exactly where you are standing right now. Because the clock does not stop, the world does not wait, and the only moment you ever truly have is this one. There is a concept that most people misunderstand so completely, so deeply, that they spend their entire lives getting it backwards. And that concept is forgiveness. Because when most people hear the word forgiveness, they think it means weakness. They think it means saying that what happened to you was acceptable. They think it means forgetting the pain, pretending the wound was not real, smiling politely at the person who hurt you and acting as if nothing ever happened. But that is not forgiveness. That is performance. And performance has nothing to do with the kind of forgiveness that Nelson Mandela practiced. Because the forgiveness Mandela chose was something completely different, something far more powerful, something that required more strength and more courage than any physical fight ever could. Because it required him to look at the people who had stolen 27 years of his life, who had separated him from his children, who had worked his body to exhaustion in a lime quarry under a brutal sun, and make a conscious, deliberate, eyes wide open decision to release the poison of hatred before it finished destroying him from the inside out. Mandela understood something that took him years of silence and suffering to truly learn, and that is that hatred is not a weapon you aim at your enemy. Hatred is a poison you drink yourself while waiting for the other person to die. And he had watched what bitterness did to people. He had seen men enter prison with fire in their eyes and leave with nothing but ash, broken by the weight of their own anger, consumed by a rage that started as righteous and ended as so. And he decided, with full awareness and full intention, that he was not going to give his captors that final victory. He was not going to let them take his future as well as his past. Because some things, the most important things, the things that live deepest inside a human being, cannot be taken by any prison, any government, or any system of oppression unless you hand them over yourself. When he walked out of prison in 1990, and we will talk more about that walk very soon. He did not walk out preaching revenge. He did not walk out with a list of people who needed to suffer for what they had done. He walked out with a vision of a country where all people, black and white, could live together with dignity and respect, and too many people that seemed impossible, naive, even offensive. Because how do you forgive something that large? How do you release something that heavy? And the answer Mandela gave with his entire life was that you do it not for them. You do it for yourself. You do it because the alternative is to remain their prisoner forever, even after the cell door is open. And that is a truth that reaches far beyond South Africa and far beyond politics and lands directly in the middle of your personal life right now. Think about what you are carrying. Think about the anger, the resentment, the old wounds that you return to in quiet moments. The people who hurt you that you replay in your mind late at night. Because every moment you spend feeding that fire is a moment you are choosing your past over your future. And Mandela, a man with more reason to be bitter than almost any human being who ever lived, chose his future every single day. And that choice, repeated daily, quietly, with discipline and with pain, is what made him not just a free man but the freest man in the room, always, in any room he ever entered. And the question for you is simple and it is serious. What are you still holding that is holding you back? Because the door is open, and it has been open for a long time. February the 11th, 1990, is a date that every human being on this planet who believes in the power of the human spirit should know by heart, should feel something when they hear it, should let land somewhere deep and real inside them. Because on that day, after 10,017 days in prison, after 27 years of separation, suffering, silence, and unbreakable inner work, Nelson Mandela walked through the gates of Victor Verster prison in Paarl, South Africa, and he did something that nobody in the history of human struggle had ever done in quite the same way. He walked out smiling. He walked out with his fist raised. He walked out with Winnie beside him, and the entire world watching. And in that single image, in that one moment, captured by cameras and broadcast to every corner of the earth, something shifted in the collective consciousness of humanity. Because people who had never been to South Africa, people who spoke different languages, lived in different cultures, faced different struggles, looked at that man walking out of those gates and felt something awaken inside themselves. Felt something that said if he can survive that, if he can walk out of 27 years of imprisonment with his dignity intact and his vision alive, then maybe, just maybe, Whatever I am facing is not as impossible as I have been telling myself. The world that waited for Mandela outside those gates was not a simple world. It was not a world that had suddenly become kind or easy or resolved. South Africa in 1990 was still a deeply wounded, deeply divided, deeply frightened country, and the work ahead of him was in many ways harder than the years behind him, because surviving prison requires endurance. But building a nation requires wisdom, patience, strategy, and the ability to hold together people who have centuries of pain between them and ask them to choose a future over a past. And Mandela stepped into that work without hesitation, without self-pity, without stopping to say that he deserved rest, that he had already given enough, that someone else should carry the weight. No, because he understood that the walk out of prison was not the finish line. It was the starting line of the most important race of his life. Now I want you to hear this next part very carefully, because this is where the story stops being about Mandela and starts being about you again. Because everyone has a moment of walking out. Everyone has a threshold they are standing at right now. A door between the life they have been living and the life they know is possible. And the question is not whether that door exists. It exists. The question is whether you are willing to walk through it with the same dignity, the same intention, the same raised fist that Mandela showed the world on that February morning. Because walking out is not just a physical act. It is a declaration. It is a statement that says, I am no longer defined by what happened to me. I am defined by what I choose to do next. And that declaration does not require a prison. It does not require a global audience. It does not require perfect conditions or a perfect moment. It requires only one thing. And that one thing is a decision made right now, not tomorrow, not next week, not when things get easier. Because things do not get easier before the decision. Things get easier because of the decision. And Mandela's walk taught the world that the most powerful step any human being can take is simply the first one forward, out of the darkness, into whatever comes next, with your head up and your fire still burning. There is a kind of leader that history produces very rarely. So rarely that when one appears, the whole world stops and pays attention. Not because of the power they hold or the title they carry or the armies that stand behind them, but because of the quality of the human being they have chosen to become through years of pain and sacrifice and quiet, unwitnessed inner work. And Nelson Mandela was that kind of leader. The kind that does not lead by standing above people, but by standing with them. The kind that does not measure success by what he accumulated for himself, but by what he built for others. And when he became the first democratically elected president of South Africa on the 10th of May, 1994, in an election where people of all races voted together for the very first time in that country's history, he did not walk into that office as a man seeking reward for his suffering. He walked in as a servant, as someone who understood with absolute clarity that the position was not a prize. It was a responsibility. And that understanding, that rare and beautiful understanding, is something that the world is desperately hungry for right now, and finding far too rarely. Mandela served only one term as president, a single 5-year term. And when people asked him why he did not seek a second term, why he did not hold on to the power that so many people fight their entire lives to reach and then refuse to release, he said simply that it was important to show that South Africa was bigger than any one person, that democracy is not about individuals. It is about institutions, it is about systems, it is about creating something that outlives you and outgrows you and continues to serve people long after your name has faded from the daily conversation. And in a world where ego drives almost every decision made by almost every person in a position of power, that choice, that voluntary, conscious, deliberate release of power, stands as one of the most radical acts of leadership in modern human history. Real talk. And this is important. Most people think that leadership is about being in front, about being seen, about having the title and the office and the applause. But Mandela's entire life tells a completely different story, because real leadership is about what you are willing to give up, not what you are trying to collect. It is about how you treat people when you have all the power and they have none. It is about whether the decisions you make in private match the values you proclaim in public. And it is about having the humility to understand that the greatest thing you can do with your position is use it to make your position unnecessary. To build people up until they no longer need you to carry them because they have learned to walk and then run on their own 2 feet. Think about the people around you right now. Think about your family, your colleagues, your community, your team, and ask yourself honestly whether you are leading them in the Mandela way, whether you are lifting them or just using them, whether you are building something that will outlast you or just feeding something that serves only you in this moment. Because leadership is not a title you receive. It is a practice you choose every single day in the small moments that nobody is watching and nobody is filming and nobody is applauding. And those small moments, accumulated over years, are what eventually produce a human being that the world cannot ignore. A human being whose life becomes a story worth telling, worth learning from, worth crossing oceans and languages and cultures to sit down and listen to. And the extraordinary truth is that you have that same potential living inside you right now. The same hunger, the same capacity, the same fire. And the only thing standing between who you are today and who you are capable of becoming is the quality of the decisions you made starting from this moment forward. So here we are, at the end of one man's story and the beginning of yours. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, because everything we have talked about today, the village, the fire for education, the walls of apartheid, the decision to fight, the 27 years in a cell, the forgiveness, the walk to freedom, the leadership without ego. None of it was an accident. None of it was luck. None of it was the result of perfect conditions, or a perfect moment, or a world that was kind and cooperative and ready to make things easy. All of it was the result of a human being who decided, again and again and again, in the darkness and in the light, in the pain and in the victory, that his life was going to mean something, that he was going to be more than what his circumstances suggested, more than what his enemies believed, more than what fear whispered to him in the quiet moments when nobody was watching and the future looked impossibly dark and distant. And now I am asking you the same thing. Not as a teacher asking a student, not as a channel asking a viewer, but as one human being looking directly at another and asking the most serious question one person can ask another. What are you doing with your one life? Because you have exactly one, not two, not a practice version, followed by the real one, exactly one. And it is happening right now, today, in this moment, while you are sitting wherever you are sitting, breathing, thinking, feeling, choosing. And the clock that is moving for you right now never moves backwards. It only moves forward. Which means that every moment you spend small is a moment you cannot recover. And every moment you spend brave is a moment that builds something permanent inside you that nobody can ever take away. Mandela did not wait for apartheid to end before he decided to grow. He grew inside the prison so that when the prison ended, he was already ready, already formed, already the man the moment needed. And that is the model. That is the template. That is the answer to every excuse you have been making about why now is not the right time. Because now is always the right time. Now is the only time. And the person you are becoming in the difficult seasons of your life is the person who will either rise or collapse when the defining moment finally arrives. So the work you do today in the obscurity, in the struggle, in the learning, in the discomfort of growing your English and growing your mind and growing your courage, that work is not wasted. It is being stored. It is being built into the foundation of who you are becoming. And foundations do not show, but everything that stands depends on them completely. You came here today to learn English, and I hope you did. I hope the words landed clearly and the language opened something new inside your mind. But more than that, I hope the story landed. I hope Mandela's life touched something real in you. Something that was already there, waiting to be reminded of its own strength. Because that is all any great story ever does. It does not give you something you did not have. It reminds you of something you forgot. And what you forgot is this. You are capable of more than you are currently doing, more than you are currently believing, more than you are currently attempting. And the world, your family, your community, your future self. They are all waiting for you to remember that and act on it. The world is waiting for you. Don't let them wait any longer. Stay strong.